and welcome to your first look at Total War PHARAOH. My name is Evan Teixeira, Lead Community Manager at Creative Assembly on Total War.
And my name is Yusuf Ali, Community Manager on Total War. We're excited to sit down with the developers here at CA Sofia.
We'll be joined by Maya Georgieva, Todor Nikolov, and Alexander Georgiev.
We'll also be joined by Emmanuel Tomov, Milcho Vasilev, and Hristo Enev.
And we're very excited to talk about the campaign, the battles.
We'll also explore the rich history and beauty behind ancient Egypt and the brutality of the Bronze Age.
But first, let's take another look at that awesome announced trailer for Total War PHARAOH.
We've got some luck starting with a force-lock province. Noblog country has been transformed into a strong, efficient output for raw materials and armaments. And we've got the Great Drill built and ready. Those freaky
Hi everybody, welcome to your first look at Total War PHARAOH. I'm happy to be joined by Maya and Todor, who have come over from the dev team to come say hello. And we're going to get right into it by asking, what is Total War PHARAOH?
Total War PHARAOH, simply put, is the next big historical Total War. It's focused on Egypt, and it aims to encompass all of the Bronze Age collapse era, bringing everything relevant of this, exciting time to the, Total War players and to the series.
What can players expect from this new historical title?
Well, the players can expect to be immersed into the Bronze Age collapse, the very last portion of the Bronze Age. And this means that they will have to go through a struggle to gain power in order to survive the apocalypse that descends upon the world. They will also be able to play as an Egyptian faction or a faction belonging to one of the other Bronze Age cultures from that time period.
And who are these different cultures? Can you name them all?
I imagine that at least the playable ones, along with the Egyptians, we are portraying the city-states of Canaan and the Hittite Empire that is about to collapse and will likely collapse before the Egyptians.
We've had 23 years of historical titles. What's different about PHARAOH from all the ones we've seen in the past?
We really have had, a long series, but we haven't had a series focused on Egypt up until now. So this is the first time Total War is exploring Bronze Age Egypt, one of the greatest civilizations ever. And also we're bringing, of course, through an Egypt-centric, point of view, the rest of the Bronze Age collapse as well. What puts, PHARAOH apart is that it kind of reveals this new age and also puts, the player freedom at the center. So we get to have like a very the freest form of expression
and capabilities
as much as you
in
can.
the Hellforge.
So,
welcome to the Hellforge, your one-stop shop for all things terrifying and most likely Geneva Convention breaking.
There is
luckily,
relatively little information about some of our characters
here.
So
as you can see, we've upgraded capacity for certain units, namely Chaos Dwarf Warriors and their blunderbuss brethren. We'll want to bolster this number out a bit more as we progress, as well as bring in some infernal units and war machines. It's not all about numbers though. As we increase how many units we can recruit, we can also unlock additional upgrades for our units. These can be quite costly, and they'll add on limits what armaments expenditure per unit per turn, but it'll increase their effectiveness in the field. Okay, that's a lot of
military technology. Also fits the purpose of Total War because they had chariots in the older kingdoms that they did not have them. In this particular portion, we're showing a very peculiar kind of Egypt, an Egypt that gets gradually torn by civil wars and internal strife. And this is an era ripe for a total war. Apart from that, the entire world slowly sinks into a crisis, which then turns into the collapse of the Bronze Age, because all of the civilizations are gradually falling apart in the region. There are a lot of disasters happening, and there are also a sort of external danger that also looms above the region.
It's really dramatic time when you have invasions, you have internal turmoil and strife, and that's what make a good setting for a total war.
So this is after the pyramids. It's obviously after the Valley of the Kings. Are these the final days of Egypt?
Kind of. They could be. Historically, they were almost saved by the bell. Just by a little bit. Egypt is, ancient. Egypt.
As we're going on the offensive, we're going to be gaining more labor,
in the game,
which can actually have its issues. Control back in our home province is dropping quite heavily due to the labor populace. I imagine they're all talking, talking about such frivolous prospects like bathroom breaks and lunch hours. I bet they're even considering the concept of paid overtime. We can settle their little ideologies by utilizing labor to rush production. But I'm going to keep matters in line for a few turns by setting an example. A missing guardrail here, a wrong type of ladder handed off there. This should hopefully keep matters in line. Our other front is the caravan. If we're unlucky, there might be many hard...
and then cease to be. But in fact, Egyptian culture still lives on. I mean, the fact that we're right now here and we're working on a game that's, glorifying this particular episode. This, as I said, a tiny fracture of their entire history, is amazing. And I often wonder, what would the ancient Egyptians think if they realize that in the future there are these people that have this very particular kind of entertainment that is difficult for us to grasp, but their doing is to honor us.
We should worship cats more.
Definitely. I think they'd be proud of what the internet has done.
Yes.
Here's a question. Who are the big people bringing about
coming workforce?
You talk about this evolution into collapse and the end of the Bronze Age.
Look who it is!
The whole collapse was a very complex
We'll be hitting
process,
the rats with the same tactic we had in
mystic history. We can only theorize about what exactly happened, but it was a combination of a lot of factors, like collapse of trading networks, disasters, and these external threats, the so-called sea peoples. In the game, they're very much prominent because they serve as a challenge for you to overcome, especially towards the end of the game. Who are the sea peoples? We can only imagine. Like, some of them are coming from the Aegean, some are coming from further west, some of them are raiders and marauders that just arrive here to plunder and destroy. Others actually are displaced and they're looking for a new place to settle. But whether their intentions are actually just to find a new home or not, it matters very little, because they turn out to be a threat to every civilization in the area. And it is believed that they brought destruction to the city-states in Greece, to the Hittite Empire in Anatolia,
Imric's boys. We need to recoup our losses and muster some new units. So for the meantime, we'll hang in Darkhold and see what happens.
Mentioned, Ramesses managed to push them back.
So we've hit our first dilemma with the convoy here.
We're talking about
if we spend cargo, we'll get less labor coming in. But on the other hand, I'm not really up for saying no to a dragon. Speaking of dragons, the dragon nerd Imric himself has left the fortress of Vorag. I guess I'm not the only one.
In Total War Pharaoh, they're the big baddies who are really pushing things along in the game.
Yeah, you could say that. Pharaoh is interesting because it's both centered on this, moment in time.
Time is of the essence, so we've no time for siege weapons. We're utilizing ladders, the skull cracker for the gate, and Drazov brutalizing the gate garrison.
but at the same time, it wasn't easy, right?
Once we're in,
and you
let's let the Skullcracker let loose.
What you would do in that situation where you need to probably seize
With
power
our guns
and
on the
also
wall,
repel an external
we run
invasion.
the penitentiary
So
now.
not only, the usual Total War vying for power, but also thinking about how to also, protect the kingdom that you have afterwards.
The experience that we're trying to give to the player in the game is one about gaining power, using that power to survive.
With the Knights of
And
Caledor
overcome the
overcome in their
challenges.
fortress by iron and magic,
Getting that
it
power
was only a
is not
matter
the
of
ultimate
time
goal.
before they crumbled before the
Using
Legion
that power
of
to
Asgore.
protect what is yours is action, which is a part of the survival thing.
Awesome. So it's really about building a kingdom in Egypt, and one that would last like we know
The fortress of
Egyptian
Vorag
kingdoms really
is
did.
ours,
Yes, of
and a
course.
tower is
And
raised in
the
Hashut's
sandbox
glory.
aspect of the
And
game
we earned
also
ourselves
kicks
a
in
new
here
gift in
because
the
you're in
process.
no way
The
obliged
Kadai
to,
Fireball,
say, become the
demonic
pharaoh
fire
in order to
elementals
survive.
bound by
You can
Chaos
try to
Dwarf
do it
sorcery
without
and
becoming the
adorned in
pharaoh. Of course, it
Dawizar
would be a
armaments.
bit harder for you,
Their
very
ferocity
likely,
makes them
but it's
exceptional
still
flank
something
troops,
that is up to
and
the player to decide.
precisely what I want in
Thank you,
my
Todor.
army.
Thank
We
you,
do,
Maya, for joining us
however,
to give this
have more
awesome
trouble on our
overview of
hands.
Total War Pharaoh.
First off,
We
we
absolutely
have this
can't
hero
wait to
unit
dive into
hanging
more of
around
this game.
outside, and she's ruining the vibe, to be honest. Gordas, deal with her. Gordas, way to go, mate. Truly living up to that surname.
We are back with
Our convoy
Todor
is under
and welcome
attack,
Ali.
and a strategic
So we
question
are
for
going to
the
be
ages
discussing
has
the
been
campaign
posed
here
to
of
us.
Total War
Do I
Pharaoh.
slaughter?
So let's get into it.
Or
Tell
do
me
I
about
massacre?
The campaign
Never
is
before
going
has
to
a
be
question been
recognized by
asked to a
anyone who
general
has
that
played
is
the Total War
so
game. You
intense.
send out your
I'll
armies,
think
you
on it
conquer
as I crush
settlements,
these
you develop your
Darwin to
settlements,
dust.
you send in
And
more
I'll let the
armies,
result
and,
determine which
until
we
you
did,
reclaim
whilst
the map
Drazov marches
as
on
much as you want
Imrik
to.
and Arels too.
What we have introduced in the campaign is the addition of very significant choices that you need to make through your playthrough, and these make up the faction that you are playing.
Amazing. So you've mentioned developing your own playstyle. So what does this mean for a player to becoming Pharaoh?
Well, for example, some of those
I think I'll deem
significant
this
choices that you
one
need to
a
make are,
slaughter.
for example,
I love
each of the
dragons.
Bronze Age gods do
Maybe
want to worship.
Imrik had the right
Like, you
idea.
can't worship
So
every
all
god, but
that's
just
left in our
limited
grand
amount of
plan
those.
is taking
You
Adarels
can
too.
also join the
I like what
court
you
of
did
the
with the
Egyptian
province,
pharaoh
Imrik,
or the
but I
Hittite
think we
king.
can do
Which position
better.
exactly do you want to
No
take?
hard
Do you want to
feelings,
be
mate.
a high commander
It's just
and gain
business.
access to more units, or perhaps the vizier who has more access to some internal court intrigue and stuff like that. But
Imrik
perhaps
has
the
brought the
most significant
numbers,
choice
and while we're
would
not
be
lacking
whether
ourselves,
you want
we're going to have to use
become
our
pharaoh
units to our
or the
advantage.
Hittite
Our
king.
firing lines have the
Interesting.
capacity
So
to
you
drop
can either
whatever he
choose
throws
one
at
or
us
the other. You
at the
know,
speed
whole
of
point of the game
however
is not
quickly
to
they
just
can
become
reload.
Pharaoh?
He's also trying to send some
Not really.
archers around the side, but we can
get to
counteract
choose
that with
either
the
of those
speed
because
of
this
the
will help
fireball.
survive the collapse of the Bronze Age.
Are there any other choices, Alex, that you can make?
There is one more choice. You can choose not to become any of those. You can choose
The
to
Kadai
be,
aren't the only people bringing the
brave,
fire, though.
person and do it by yourself, not
Give him a taste,
regarding yourself with
Our Skullcracker is already getting started by tending to the fields. A bit preemptive, we've only one now, but hey, we need a nice place for Cinderbrush
But
to
again,
relax in.
do you want to spend your gold in the court, or do you
Look
want
at
to
him
spend it
frolic.
on troops?
Let's see. Something interesting here, like all of our systems that we're trying to we're creating.
So, with
we're
Imrik
creating
off the
them
board
with
and
the
these
the
lands
sandbox
firmly
element of the
under our
game.
control,
So
we
when
can
we're
get to
talking
further
about
bolstering
many
our
choices,
infernal
but
machine
we have the
and prepare
choice
to
combine
take on
all
those
of
pesky
systems
Darwin.
in the
This is a
particular way
definite
that they would like
victory
to
for
do.
us, despite our
obviously,
losses.
the evolution of your
We'll need to
kingdom is a big deal,
regroup
whether
for a
you
bit,
choose to be a pharaoh,
gather our
whether you
strength,
choose to be a
and
Hittite king,
bolster
or
up our army.
choose to go the bold
Once
path
we're
of
at full
nothing.
strength,
But
we
all
march
of
on
this
the
sort of
expedition.
revolves around this
And
idea
we're
of
gonna
your
bring a
kingdom
new
evolving
friend
from
with us.
prosperity to crisis to collapse. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Wait,
Yeah,
hold on a second.
it's more than your kingdom. It's actually
so
the entire world.
that's where
This
you
is how
went,
we
Tretch.
This is how we
What
portray
fitting
the collapse of the
behaviour
Bronze Age.
for a rat.
The world
We've established a
goes
bit of a
through several
foothold here,
distinct states
and I want
of
my province back under
collapse.
my full control.
And it all depends
Tretchy
on
has
the
made this
pillars of
personal,
civilization.
so I'm going to expend
These are
some of my
special
labour
settlements
to
on the
build a
campaign map
Dreadquake
that
mortar,
we consider
primarily
core for the
to
Bronze
hurt
Age
him,
civilized world.
while I'm also
And
preparing,
as
as
these
it will take us a
settlements
few
get
turns to reach
damaged or
Darkhold.
even destroyed,
I've also
the
got some
overall level of
Conclave
civilization
influence,
goes
and
down.
Floor 2 has
And there
opened up in the
are,
Tower
as I
of
said,
Tsar.
several different
I still
levels
need a bit more influence for some of the unlocks here, and wait, hold on.
And you can see it in the game.
Someone's taken one of my seats.
These
Zatan! Oh, come on, man. I thought we were pals in like a Cold War and not really pals kind of way. You're lucky you're the focus of the next episode, or I swear on her shit. Anyways, anger aside, we need to strategize. I'm going to add modifications in the Hellforge for our units to spice them up, as we're still lacking a bit in numbers, and we need every advantage we can get. We're also bringing in 2 regiments of renown. The Blazing Beards, Chaos Dwarf Warriors with beards that fill me personally with fear, and Hashut's favourite engine, the Demon's Tongue. You brought this on yourself, Tretch. I'm going to scorch your earth and break whatever affront of vehicle technology this thing is. Ugh, so primitive.
You might not survive.
I'm cursing that doom wheel with the curse of Hashut, just as Tretch's reinforcements arrive.
You know what happened during the collapse of the Bronze Age. We have
right, so what is this button?
Washing over the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. There was probably some apocalyptic event during the ground. So we represent this disasters of different sorts.
That's a really fun button.
Not visible in the campaign map.
Well, we've successfully discarded any bravery those reinforcements of Tretch has had, which leaves us with a nice little massacre to have here.
Earthquakes, plagues.
I'd say thank you for the warm-up, but I think we're hot enough.
The player would like not to be in this place.
Oh, so this one's a massacre.
So basically, as the world, as your civilization goes and collapses sort of through war or turmoil, the whole world is represented by collapse.
That was commendable. If dishonorable, Tretch. Have fun in the mines. So, with Tretch's forces blown to Kingdom Come, we've eked out a victory here, but the expedition is still on the horizon. I need to take more time to recuperate and rebuild my forces. But I've got some spicy projects going on at the Black Fortress. It's going to be an interesting time for the PHARAOH expedition, by the time I get around to them.
So, if other pillars of civilization are struggling, it will have an impact on the whole world.
We've rebuilt up our forces, bolstering here and there. We've got some nasty new tricks up our sleeve with a new tower seat, and we're throwing everything we can at this. We need them dead if we're going to show the Tower of Tsar how badly Astragoth messed up for exiling us all our years ago. We also managed to summon a new friend into the fray for the battle too. Karazakarak expedition, say hello to the Kadai Destroyer.
And once again, depending on the level of difficulty, we're not aiming to...
Luckily, we've got a meat shield line of labourers here too, which is convenient considering we took our time looking cool, arriving in slow-mo. No apologies, they understand. Let's sacrifice some duck, shall we? For her shit. We'll send the Gadai Destroyer in first to deal with their frontline units, to replace the grudges in their hearts with fear. Oh, some lads are trying to pull a sneaky flank. I don't think the gyrocopters were ready for Cinder Breath, though.
Gain statistical legitimacy. And the more legitimacy you have, the stronger your claim to the crown.
While the Kadai are out here having the best time one can have while bound to Darwizar technology, we'll use our new tower seat to spawn in even more Fireborn to flank these would-be flankers. How unfortunate. Admittedly, the only people here I feel sorry for, though, are the labourers. The Destroyer is quite excitable, but it's okay, we'll get more.
So that you can use them yourself, which is something that historically happened in ancient Egypt and not only. So you gain legitimacy, and at some point, when you have reached a sufficiently high level, you can proclaim yourself to be the actual pharaoh. Now, it really much depends if there is a single pharaoh at the moment, in which case it is harder to do so.
Yep.
But in case there is no single pharaoh, which is going to be at some point the state of the game for the Egyptians, because the pharaoh must die at some point. These are spoilers, sorry. I should have given a sign on that.
The only one who's got time.
Exactly. It will be much easier for you to proclaim yourself a pharaoh if there is no single pharaoh. And then you enter a period of civil war that you will have to push through, and you will have to be the faction with the most legitimacy at the end, in which case you become the single ruling pharaoh. and you enjoy the full privileges of being a pharaoh.
Before talking about the privileges, there is something I think interesting. We have this David to Goliath type of story because we start with limited resources and limited lands. To become eligible for the crown, you need to have at least one sacred land. So this is like a fairy tale. Like you have this sacred land, now you can strive to become the pharaoh. There are like many other things that you need to do, many more lands to conquer, many more monuments to construct. But this is the path. You start from one single land. So anybody, a Canaan faction can go in Egypt, conquer one land, and all of a sudden become eligible to become the pharaoh.
Yeah, it's actually the choice that we mentioned earlier, that you get to choose whether you want to become the pharaoh or the Hittite great king. And it is possible for an Egyptian faction, for example, it would be more straightforward if they go for being a pharaoh, but they can also head north to Anatolia, conquer a bit of Hittite land, and proclaim themselves a pretender for the throne of the Hittite great king, which did not actually happen in history, although at some point there was a Hittite prince who was invited actually to go to Egypt and become the pharaoh, but he was ambushed and killed en route.
So close. But in terms of legitimacy, generally, we can see it in history. If you have enough lands and enough other claims to legitimacy, you can go and try to claim the crown.
Yeah, I remember that in the very beginning we were wondering, is this actually a plausible scenario? But yeah, enough research and confirmed with some experts, it turned out that almost everything that would work in any state in history is also applicable for ancient Egypt.
We're humans. And that's why we like history games so much. Like the stories there are just as fascinating as any fantasy that you can imagine. Like real life. Incredible. It's fascinating.
So thank you, Todor. Thank you, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. We cannot wait to dive into the campaign mechanics of this. So cool. But first, here's a quick sneak peek at the campaign map. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Hristo, Miljo. Pleasure to have you both to talk battles today.
Well, for Total War Pharaoh, we wanted to make sure that battles feel a lot more historical and realistic. Of course, we, being in the Bronze Age, have some limited access to different unit types. So we have tried to focus even more with our features on the infantry versus infantry combat. For example, the unit stances feature.
Yeah. Unit stance is a new feature that actually replaces the formations we had in old Total Wars. So they're basically orders that you give to units, but instead of a movement or attack order, they're actually ordered to go forward or an order to go backwards while facing forward.
Yeah, we have also introduced a lot of new animations and the way the animations work for infantry versus infantry combat. You are now going to see a lot of more matched animations between the different units. You will see it's actually defending against attacks, then striking back. We have also introduced a lot more varied battle maps that have a lot more features built into them that will bring more tactical decisions to the player that is in command of their armies. So now they can find those features like cliffs or forests or different difficult terrains or water that can protect them from the side and try to exploit them in the best way that they can. Thus, for example, try to create their own choke point battle or find a good place on the map where they can ambush the enemy while they're coming at them.
Amazing. So like the dynamic like terrain and stuff has been completely changed for Total War Pharaoh. So you can really take advantage of your of your battles against your enemies?
Well, we had weather system in previous Total Wars, but now we're introducing a dynamic change to the weather. So, for example, a battle can start in a rain environment, and it can gradually become a storm or even a thunderstorm. And that can change the terrain as well. In rain, there will be patches of mud appearing on the battlefield. And, for example, in a sandstorm, there will be patches of sand just gradually building up.
And those have effects on the units that are going to be on the battlefield. For an example, heavier units or chariots are going to find it hard to move through mud and that sort of terrain. Sand is going to exhaust units moving through it faster, depending again on how light they are, thus giving the lighter units more advantage when they're fighting on sand. And the weather itself is going to change the way some of the units behave. For example, archers are going to find it much harder to hit their targets when they're trying to shoot in a sandstorm. You can imagine how hard that can be.
So the dynamic weather has, again, completely changed the way you look at battles now. So you've got rain, you've got thunderstorms. Is there anything else we can expect from weather?
Yes, there is also fog, which is from previous Total Wars. There is sandstorm, which I mentioned before, and there is sweltering weather, which is a desert being really hot.
So very warm, very, very hot.
Yeah, this will have a huge impact on the exhaustion levels of your units, and you need to be careful when you're fighting in a sweltering weather conditions. The players are not going to be expecting the dynamic weather in every battle that they're fighting.
They will need to adapt to
this is something that they need to adapt to and see how their tactics might change. Because if they have thought that they can take a certain approach towards the enemy, but then a rain comes out and makes it so that this whole terrain becomes all muddy, they might think that this approach might not be as good for their chariots, for example, and need to change their battle plans on the fly when those things happen. Choosing where you fight basically will depend on the type of army that you're building and want to have. For example, it's a very natural thing that the Egyptians have much lighter armies that are going to be finding it easier to fight when they're on sand or in sweltering weather, because their armor is usually not as heavy and they're kind of used to that type of terrain, whereas the Hittites, being more heavily armored and not so used to this type of terrain, are going to be finding it much harder when they need to fight in the sand. On the other hand, they are heavier with better armor, so in hand-to-hand engagements, when the Egyptians are not using the advantage of the terrains around them, the Hittites might have an upper hand in that.
And there are even units that have even more advantage when fighting in the desert, just because they're suited and they've lived their whole lives in the desert.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there are a ton of factors that weigh into any battle, from the unit you're bringing to the field to the weather. What else is in Total War Pharaoh that makes it different from other titles in the historical Total War catalog?
Well, we have improved on the way sieges work and introduced a number of new things there. Fire being one of the big ones. Now, we've had fire before, and we've seen fire in Total War games from a long time ago, but now it is much more dynamic, and it can spread around, and the player can deliberately set certain places of either a settlement or even a forest ablaze, so that they can use this as a tactical advantage, if this is the type of tactic that they want to employ. Setting a settlement on fire is going to make it easier for the attacker to try and capture it, but then again, it will also make it so that later, if they want to repair it and keep it after capturing it, it will be much more expensive to repair that city. And the local population is probably not going to be as happy to set their city ablaze when we were trying to fight there.
Smart.
The fire is, as I said, dynamic, so it will spread around. So even if you are trying to employ a tactic in which you're trying to burn the enemy city down, you need to be careful as to how you're doing it, because the way the fire spreads, your units might suffer from that as well.
Or win the battle really fast.
Yeah, exactly, because fire doesn't recognize friend from foe.
Right.
And another thing about sieges is that we have removed pocket ladders, finally, and we've replaced them with siege ladders. So we will have siege ladders, siege towers, battering rams, and then the new thing that the ancient Egyptians love to do, wall sapping. They
undermined the walls,
the wall and
of the settlements so that it can actually crumble down.
Yeah. And create an opening for the attacking army.
Now, the wall sapping doesn't happen dynamically on the battlefield, but in the campaign, if the player decides to invest a few turns in undermining the walls of the settlement, they can actually bring some of them down and then start the assault, which will make them fight in a different battle map, which has already some of the walls broken down, and the enemy needs to find different ways in which to defend their settlement instead of just placing soldiers over the walls.
It sounds like historical accuracy is really important in Total War Pharaoh.
We have tried to make sure that this game is as historically authentic as we possibly can make it. Of course, there are some gameplay elements that still need to be present for it to work. Yeah. But all the units that we've done, the way the settlements have been done, the way they have been designed, we have been looking at ancient maps and ancient representations of certain settlements and armor and equipment and all those things to make sure that they look exactly as they looked back then.
And then we do try to improve on how chariots work, because you can't have a Bronze Age game without chariots. We have a few different types of chariots, but the main thing is that we increase the number of chariots you have, and chariots are really, really powerful for Pharaoh.
We wanted to make sure that armies look large with a lot of chariots in them. So now instead of just having 12 or 18 chariots in a unit, you're going to have up to 30 chariots in a unit, and they're still going to maneuver around the battlefield well. The way you use chariots, if you decide to try and employ them in your tactics, is going to be very important, because they can be amazingly strong when used in the right way, and be very expensive and not effective at all if used in the wrong way.
You can get a chariot stuck in mud, for example, or in sand if it's a heavy chariot. And that's not a good position to be.
It's absolutely amazing. So just the complexity of it. It's no longer just a power play. It is you got to consider all these factors in your battle.
Yes.
If the player is utilizing the terrain the way they are supposed to, the way they should, and if the player is playing to the strengths of their own army and to the weaknesses of the enemy army, they are going to have a lot more chances to win a battle that actually might look very, very bad for them in the beginning.
Milcho, Hristo, thank you for joining us to talk about battles.
Oh my God, there was so much in there.
So good.
So much.
Siege ladders, dynamic weather, fire.
Yes.
Let's take a quick look at those beautiful battle maps and a special look at the city of Mennefer.
Welcome back to Todor. Welcome, Emma. So we are going to be talking about the culture and history of Total War Pharaoh. So let's get right into it. Tell me about the New Kingdom of Egypt.
So the New Kingdom is the period in which Egypt grows to a majestic empire. It takes place between the 16th and the 11th century BC, and we're looking at a period right at the end, after the Egyptian empire has reached its topmost position, and it started to slowly go into decline.
So Egyptian deities were a huge part of Egyptian culture. So what part do they play in Total War Pharaoh?
Different subsets of deities were revered in different parts of the realms, and we are reflecting this in the game by having different subsets of deities being available in each realm, and whereupon you discover this subset and you are able to worship them, sort of like you've encountered this local cult and you've decided that this is a god worth worshiping because it suits you, usually.
Sure.
Yeah, and the challenge that we have in the game is that we're not only showing the Egyptian gods, but we're also showing the gods of the Hittites and the Canaanites.
Sure.
And the main problem is that we can't include absolutely every deity. That's impossible because the Hittites, for example, they had...
They supposedly had 1,000.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So they really went into details.
It would be a bit mechanics heavy, the game. Yeah. And also we would need every little village and group of people to have their own separate god, which would be kind of difficult to implement, honestly.
Of course.
Now, I know you just mentioned that you've got all these different cultures with all of these different deities, and obviously we're representing a territory all the way from up in Turkey, down through Egypt, all the way down to Sudan. So can you tell me a little bit about the cultures in Total War Pharaoh and sort of the role they play in the game?
Well, the playable cultures are three. You have the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. And there are also cultures that are not playable. For example, to the west of the Nile, there are the Libu tribes that are living as desert nomads, occasionally threatening you, but perhaps occasionally you can strike a truce with them and perhaps even hire some of their units. We have tried to express the cultural diversity of the Bronze Age with every tool that we had at our disposal. For example, different cultures have different units. They also inhabit different climates on the campaign map. So you will be fighting on desert battle maps or battle maps around the Nile or in oasis when you're fighting anywhere in Egypt, while the battle maps in Anatolia are more green and lush with imposing mountains in the background. So the architecture of the battle maps itself, the various buildings, also reflects the different cultures. And we have even gone into further details. For example, as part of your character development, you can assign different titles to your characters, and these are also specific to different cultures, and some of them are specific to different factions.
So how have you captured the different cultures from those different regions in the game, specifically?
Well, on the more narrative side, we have tried to express the character of the cultures through actual characters, which would be the more generic kind of commanders and generals that you play with on the campaign map. And since they are a very predominant part of what you do in the game, we have tried to differentiate them as characters. And all of them have specific quirks. The Egyptians are a bit haughty, for example. The Nubian Egyptians sort of long after the lost glory of the Kush kingdom, which was subjugated by Egypt at some point during the New Kingdom. The Canaanites are ready for everything because they've seen everything. Their country has been, their land has been a battleground for great empires for centuries. They're used to everything. They're a bit nihilistic, but still they hold out hope that their children might inherit something livable. And the Hittites are sort of divided between the type of Hittite leader that might want to keep their community together and protect their community, and the other one who is just a mercenary at heart and try to simply find profit where he can.
Who are the faces, who are the rulers we are going to see in the game? Like who are the faces we're going to love and who are we going to hate in Pharaoh?
Well, I certainly hope that one can find things to be endeared about, you know, in terms of every character that they play with. And all of them have their quirks, but all of them also have humanity, I hope. And I hope that we have tried to express that in the game scripts and whatnot. Otherwise, the three cultures are represented by, respectively, the Egyptian culture by 4 characters, the Canaanites are 2, and the Hittites are also 2. And all of them have their own reasons and claim to glory and to ruling, while others might fall more on the side of the spectrum that just wants to prove that they are strong. These 2 representatives that we have of on one side, the desire to unite and to leave something for the ages that will be everlasting. This is our quote-unquote main character, who is Ramses, later to become Ramses III. How he starts out the game is as almost a child. He's very, very young, but he has been given the rulership over Sinai, which is a border region of Egypt that is between Egypt and Canaan. And it's basically his proving grounds. And from there on, he wants to show everyone that he is simply the best person for the job. He is extremely talented. And everything that he's tried so far has worked, including keeping in check the raids of the most fearsome raider in one of our other characters, the most fearsome raider by reputation of that time, Ursu, who is a Canaanite war chief. Historically, we only know the name of that character, so we needed to do some narrative work in order to create a character for him.
Shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, we unshroud some of that mystery, and we give him motivation and whatnot. He hates Ramses' guts, while Ramses doesn't see what the big deal is. This is just some raider. Well, for Ursu, this isn't a game. He survived for decades, barely. He has 1,000 wounds to speak of how he managed to survive. And for him, the fact that this child is getting in his way of raiding and ravaging and sacking all of Egypt is a real problem.
Indeed, one of the things that I like about Ursu is that he does not really understand the necessity of ruling a land, except for this is a proper source of riches and things you can consume. This is how he works, this is how he understands the world, which is quite different from Ramesses, who has this duty to perform well, like to defend his homeland, and in this prove his own worth.
Right.
Because Ramesses, if I remember correctly, he's very much wants to take after Ramesses II, his namesake.
Yes.
The great pharaoh before him, the father of Merneptah. And this is what he's going to try and do in the game.
Yeah.
So thank you, Todor. Thank you, Manuel, for joining us. Oh my goodness, the culture and history of the game. We're just blown away by all of this. But before we wrap up, a very special treat for you all. Here is the opening cinematic for Total War Pharaoh. Enjoy. Thank you all for joining us. We're incredibly excited to share a first look at Total War Pharaoh. And we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of what's to come.
There's a ton on the way in the next few months. So remember that pre-orders are open and that by pre-ordering, you'll be ready to play day one when the game releases this October.
And that's us from Sophia and the New Kingdom of Egypt. Here's one final look at the trailer of Total War Pharaoh. Enjoy.